I am Flavia Zimmerman from the Australian Institute of International Affairs in Western Australia. And today we have with us Professor David Blair. Professor David Blair is a researcher at the University of Western Australia and the director of the Australian International Gravitational Research Centre. And tonight we'll be talking about the discovery of gravitational waves as a model for international collaboration in science. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, Dr. David.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. My first question would be, could you please explain exactly what gravitational waves are?
Yeah, well, gravitational waves are just 100 years old. Einstein, in 1916, predicted from his theory that there should be a sort of wave that is a ripple of the curvature of space. Now, that's a complicated idea for people who don't even quite know what space is. And but he had previously, and the year before, had put forward his theory that space is elastic and that matter deforms space. And then his next big step was to show that he could solve his equations that he had developed and solve them to show that there would be waves. Mm-hmm. And so those waves should travel through empty space at the speed of light, but they're a bit like sound. Sound makes our eardrums vibrate. Gravity waves make everything vibrate.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your explanation. And how the discovery of gravitational waves and the new science culture that is emerging will impact international relations and the way countries relate to one another?
Well, I think it is the process of discovery that has been already very influential, because we had a huge challenge. When Einstein predicted these waves, he said they were of academic interest only. They're not going to be possible to detect. For 40 years, physicists argued about whether these waves actually were real or not. And finally, around the 1960s, people realized that yes, they were real, and that there could possibly be a way that you might detect those waves. But then when people started to build devices to try to detect these waves, which are really a little bit like microphones to hear sounds, but these are now sounds from the universe, and they're waves of space, not waves of pressure in the air. So it had to be a totally new type of microphone. And the devices we made were vastly too insensitive. They were actually the most sensitive instruments that had ever been created, but they were vastly too insensitive. And then in the last 40 years, there has been a massive international collaboration. Physicists especially from Russia, USA, Europe, and some of us in Australia, have been part, and Japan, have all played a major role in solving 1 million problems and gone step by step by step to make more and more sensitive instruments. And the difficulty of doing that just can't be expressed. We had to make instruments that were 100 million times better than the first attempts that were made. We had to devise completely new technologies to do this. And in particular, there was a great physicist in Moscow who made very penetrating theory of the processes of measurement. His name was Vladimir Briginsky, and so there was this Russian team that still in the Cold War, was interacting very closely with Americans and Europeans to be finding ways, and he was doing some of the theory, others were doing the experiment. He actually set me on the right path for building detectors here, And then our focus maybe went a lot more towards America, but at the same time we collaborated. We have people in Taiwan who are participating, we're collaborating with people in China, and all of us have been working together towards this goal. Finally, last year, the instruments reached a point where we were a bit optimistic that we might be able to detect some waves coming from space. But if I was asked a year ago, I would have been told, well, I think there's a good chance before 2020. But I would never have guessed that within a few hours of switching on the first instruments, we had picked up our first signal. Mm-hmm. And that's how it was.
Wonderful. Absolutely fascinating, Dr. David. So just before we give closure, do you think that the relationship between Russians and Australians and Americans throughout the discovery of gravitational waves and the continuing process of further research may alleviate tensions between Russia and Western nations? What are your views on this regard?
Well, I can't promise too much, but the process of people collaborating. There were times when there were enormous difficulties for Russian scientists to enter Australia, or Russian scientists to leave the US, or leave Russia or go to the US, and whenever this happened, there would be a massive scientific protest to the governments concerned to try to create this flow of people, because we knew that the flow of people was essential to our flow of ideas. And so in a small way, I think we've influenced a lot. Right now we're working very closely with some groups in China, and we are hoping to be building a detector in Australia that will be an Australia-Chinese project. And we think that will be very good for balancing the relationship between Australia and China. Our relationship, some people would say our relationship today is a relationship where we dig up iron ore, send it to China. China sends us computers and mobile phones back here and everything else that we buy. Well, for us to be participating together in a massive challenge, and the challenge now is to build detectors that are quite a few times better. We've been able to hear just a few sounds from the universe. The fact that we can hear for the first time is absolutely astonishing. It's as if we have been deaf all our lives, and suddenly we have bionic ears. Suddenly we can hear the universe. So humanity will never again be deaf to the sounds of the universe, but we want to be able to hear better. And to be able to hear better, we've got to make instruments that are bigger and better. We know exactly how to do it. And in fact, we worked very closely with a big international team last year, designing the next detectors for gravitational waves. We did that in China, and we now have an idea of how we should go forward for the next step. Perhaps I should just add one other thing about this collaboration. The collaboration that detected the gravitational waves is a collaboration of 1,000 physicists, about 80 institutions from, I think, about 18 countries in the world. So everybody made a critical contribution. If you took away one component, it would have all fallen apart, like taking one wheel off a car wouldn't work anymore. Everybody provided different aspects to the making of it, and that is really where this model of collaboration is, that a process could work where we're motivated by an exciting idea, by the dream of detecting Einstein's waves for the first time, and that motivated us all to work together for this common cause and to create something which is the most marvelous thing that humans have ever created.
Wonderful, Dr. David. Well, a pleasure having you with us tonight, and we are going to stay here. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.